Hello, everyone, and welcome to Paul Beckman's International FBomb. I'm Francine Witte, guest hosting for Paul. And tonight we have a lot of great readers, and we have a special guest, Sandra Arnold, who's launching her novella, and she has a few featured readers along with her. And so let me get started by introducing Sandra. Sandra Arnold is an award-winning writer with 7 published books. Her novella in Flash, The Bones of the Story, Inspired Books, UK, and a short story collection, Where the Wind Blows, Truth Serum Press, Australia, have just been published. Her novel, The Ash, the Well, and the Bluebell, Macaro Press, New Zealand, is also published in Bulgaria by Aviana Burgess, a flash fiction collection, Soul Etchings, Retreat West Books, UK. A nonfiction book, Sing No Sad Songs, Canterbury University Press, New Zealand. 2 earlier novels, Tomorrow's Empire, Horizon Press, New Zealand. A Distraction of Opposites, Hazard Press, New Zealand. Her short fiction has been published and anthologized internationally and has received nominations for the Best Small Fictions, Best Microfictions, and the Pushcart Prize. She has held writing residencies at the Robert Lord College, Dunedin, and the Saracen Landfall University of Otago Press, Waterfall Bay. She has a PhD in creative writing from Central Queensland University, Australia. Sandra Arnold.
Thank you, Francine. And thank you all for being here. Okay, so I'm going to be reading from, this is the novella that's just been published, The Bones of the Story. And I'll tell you a little bit about how it started. It's basically about a group of children who like crossing a railway line when the train was coming, and they thought that was a great deal of fun. One of the children got killed by the train, and so the stories in the novella are all told through the eyes of each of those children. There were 6 of them, and they contacted the boy who was killed, called Ralph. They contacted his parents 20 years later on the anniversary of his death. And so they wanted to talk to his mother about their experience of the accident and what happened. So that was basically, it started because when I was a child, we lived near a railway line, and we did climb the fence and run across the railway line to get to the park on the other side. And we didn't wait until the train was coming close, but we could hear at a distance, and somehow that made it really exciting. So I was thinking about that and thinking how children take risks and they don't think about the consequences. And so I started thinking about, also years after I used to do it as a child, I heard a story about a boy who crossed the line and actually did get hit by the train. And so I wondered, what happened? Why did he cross the line? What happened? Who witnessed it? And the stories just developed from that. So I'll just quickly read the introduction, and then I'll read 2 stories from each of those children who were talking to Ralph's mother 20 years later. The Bones of the Story consists of 9 linked stories about 6 childhood friends who witnessed the death of one of them, Ralph, when they were all playing a game of beat the train on a railway line. The first story opens 20 years later with Ralph's mother answering the phone to one of these friends, who asks if they can all meet on the anniversary of Ralph's accident. The other stories are told from the perspective of each friend who witnessed what happened to Ralph, the aftermath of the tragedy, and how this changed them. It also includes Ralph's own story. Ralph's stepfather, Kev, who disappeared on the same day that Ralph died, adds a further mystery. The final story is told in Kev's voice. So the first story I'm going to read is from one of the friends called Deb. Deb's father sent her out of the house that Saturday afternoon because he was going to have a bath. He pulled the tin bath from its hook in the yard and told her to bugger off and not come back until tea time, when her mother would be home from cleaning Nana's house. So she finished sweeping the yard, hung the broom back on its hook, and ran down the street to round up the gang. That meant standing at the door of each house, yelling for Brian, Martin, Ralph, Angela, and Joyce. After the roundup, they stood in a huddle in the street planning their afternoon. They voted on doorbells, sweet shop, and railway line in that order. After ringing the doorbells in the row of posh houses behind the allotments, they did their disappearing act before the front doors opened, and then ran down the road screaming with laughter at the angry voices in their wake. Next stop was Mr. Pearson's sweet shop. As always, Angela easily distracted Mr. Pearson with her long blonde hair and big blue eyes and the beginning of boobs, though she was only 10, while Ralph and Martin filled their pockets with aniseed balls, jelly babies, and blackjacks. And Brian, Joyce, and Deb looked at the comics, and Brian managed to stuff one up his jumper, while Mr. Pearson was busy telling Angela she had the face of an angel. Angela turned on her most angelic smile and picked up a licorice strap. But as she counted out her pocket money, he told her she could have it free as a treat, and he waved to her with a stupid look on his face as they all headed out the door. At the railway line, Brian hid the comic in the tall grass next to the fence, and Ralph and Martin put their stash of sweets on top to share with everyone later. And Angela said the licorice strap was for Ralph because he deserved a special treat after that last beating he got from his stepdad. And licorice straps were his favorite. And Ralph looked at his feet and grinned. He said that running across the railway line in front of the train was his favorite game in the whole world. And there was no way a stupid beating from his stupid stepdad was going to stop him. The others all laughed, and Deb said the look on the driver's face would be worth any beating, though privately she hoped her dad would never find out what they'd done. Ralph said he'd let them all have a bite of his licorice strap when they came back over the railway line. Then they could read the comic and stuff their faces with gobstoppers, aniseed balls, jelly babies, and blackjacks. Brian licked his lips and rolled his eyeballs, and everybody threw bits of grass at him and laughed themselves silly while they waited for the faint rumble of the train. The sound of the horn at the crossing was the signal to pull their woolen hats down low over on their faces and wind their scarves around their mouths. Then they climbed over the fence, and when the train came around the bend, they sprinted across the tracks in front of it, beating it by seconds. No matter how many times they played this game, the hilarity never wore off. The driver always blasted his horn and shook his fist, and the train always roared past, and the children always collapsed in a heap of raucous laughter on the bank. Only, on this day, Ralph tripped, and his foot got jammed under the track. Deb's foot got wedged between two wooden posts in the high fence, and her dress got caught on a big rusty nail. She couldn't get enough traction to unhook the dress, yank her foot out, and clamber over the fence. But she could hear the train thundering down the line, and though she couldn't hear over the clamour what Brian, Martin, Angela, and Joyce on the far side of the bank was shouting, she saw the look on their faces when they realised there was nothing they could do, and there was nothing Ralph could do, and there was nothing Deb could do. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The driver slammed his fist on the horn and yanked on the brakes, and the train came to a shuddering stop a little way down the line, and the driver leapt out of his cab, and Deb's mouth was still wide open with no sound and no breath, and there were people everywhere, and a siren was shrieking down the road, and in all the milling about and yelling, someone noticed her on the fence and ran off to fetch her dad. And when he arrived, his face was red and furious, because he always looked forward to his Saturday afternoon bath with his ciggies and his whiskey, and now it was ruined. And then he took in the scene with the train and the howling children and the police and the blood on the track and the neighbours holding Ralph's screaming mother back as the ambulance crew loaded what was left of him into the ambulance. And Deb's dad went white as a ghost, and he yanked her foot off the fence and ripped her dress off the nail and grabbed her arm and pulled and pushed her all the way back to their house. And as soon as they got in the yard, he took off his leather belt, and his eyes were bulging in their sockets, and the veins in his neck were like blue ropes, and Deb's face was awash with tears, because Ralph hadn't even got to enjoy his licorice strap. That's the end of that one, and the next one I'll read is from Joyce. Head flung back and feet raking the sky, she soared higher and higher. Each upward thrust brought her closer to the horizontal bar. Ralph would have made it over the top on that Friday if it hadn't been for the groundsman threatening to call the police. Ralph had put his best contrite face on and convinced the groundsman that he was really sorry, and yes, he did realize now that his dangerous behavior was setting a bad example to the younger kids, and no, he'd never do it again. As the gang trudged home, disappointed, Ralph said he would go back on Sunday when his stepdad was up at the pub and his mum out playing bingo, and there'd be no one in the playground to call the police. They all cheered and promised they'd be there. They knew he'd do it. Ralph was unstoppable once he'd set himself a goal. But the next day was Saturday, and then the train happened. So Joyce's determination to go over the bar now was as much for Ralph as for herself. This was Joyce's first day in the playground for a month, and she timed it for the groundsman's day off. For a whole month, she hadn't been allowed outside, and neither had the rest of the gang. Brian, Martin, Angela, Deb, and Joyce were in the same class, but they weren't allowed to play together anymore. Ralph's mother blamed the gang for what happened to Ralph. The other parents blamed Ralph's mother. His stepdad had disappeared again, probably so no one could blame him, according to the gossips. Joyce's parents said if they ever caught her playing with that godforsaken bunch of misfits ever again, they'd keep her indoors for the rest of her life. The teachers saw to it that they were separated in the classroom and out of it. No one at school was allowed to talk about the incident, as they called it, though the headmaster kept warning everyone in assembly about the consequences that would follow if any child was seen climbing that fence or running across those tracks again. The teacher moved Ralph's desk out of the classroom and shuffled the other desks around to fill the empty space, as if Ralph had never existed. Joyce swung higher and higher, gaining momentum and all the time listening out for the train. Then came the familiar rumble. By the time the train reached the crossing and the horn blared, she was so high she could have let go and flown straight into the sky. All the kids stopped what they were doing and stood and watched with their mouths hanging open. Now she was parallel with the bar. The moment the train roared past was the moment she went over the top in a perfect arc. The searing blue above, the grey concrete beneath, the juddering descent, her hands burning with the effort of gripping the sidebars. As soon as the swing slowed down, she slid off, shaking with relief that she hadn't fallen and cracked her head open on the concrete. The kids were cheering, so she waved to them with more bravado than she was feeling before she heaved herself over the fence. She ran across the railway line, pausing for a second to look down at the place where Ralph's foot had been trapped beneath the track. She stopped breathing. Then she was up and over the second fence. She searched in the long grass for the stash the gang had stolen from Mr. Pearson's shop. Her heart thudded when she saw the comic and the piles of gobstoppers, jelly babies, aniseed balls, and blackjacks still in the place they left them, still waiting. After a month in the grass, she thought they might have been nibbled by mice, but there was no sign of that. She picked up the licorice strap that Angela had given Ralph to make up from the thrashing from his stepdad. Ralph had promised them all a bite when they came back from their race with the train, so she took one now. She found a sharp stone, and with the taste of licorice filling her mouth, she dug a hole and buried the stash and covered it with soil and patted it down hard. Then she picked handfuls of daisies and dandelions and scattered them over the mound until it looked as if there were hundreds of tiny suns and stars on the cold, bare earth. Thank you. Right, now I've got some readers to introduce. So we're going to start off with Karen. And I'll just read her bio first before Karen begins to read. Karen Schauber's flash fiction appears in 102 international literary magazines, journals and anthologies, with a pushcart, best small fictions, four best microfiction nominations, and a spot on the Wigleaf Top 50 long list. She is editor of the award-winning flash fiction anthology, The Group of Seven Reimagined, Contemporary Stories Inspired by Historic Canadian Paintings, Heritage House, 2019. Schauber curates Vancouver Flash Fiction, an online resource hub, and Miramichi Flash, a monthly literary column. In her spare time, she is a seasoned family therapist. Karen, thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. It's a pleasure to be here to celebrate your new book, The Bones of a Story, after those readings, which were remarkable. Wonderful writing, and wow, such insight into that age group. Wonderful. I'm going to read a flash called For You, Birdie. We were dirt poor back then. We used to imagine being anywhere else but Poye Bayou, a low-down nowhere town with nowhere people and nowhere jobs, where everything went around just the way it came, day after day, year after year. Abilene did us proud when she up and left, got herself knocked up by that Earl fella, had a big win of cash or something, and then the two of them plain vamoosed, left our bend along the Mississippi and slipped into the shadows. I sure did miss Abilene. Joined at the hip we were. We used to swim the lazy river, cooling, pool our change for a frosty Coke. Times we would sit out on the front porch, pinch my ma's Pall Malls when she was out cleaning, our feet hoisted up on the rail, drawing long, slow puffs, flipping through ma's Sears catalog, fancying this and that, the smoke curling and meandering into places we'd never go. I near stopped dreaming after she left. She had that certain something, Abilene. She'd be looking way ahead past you, even though you knew there was nothing there to see. She'd pay notice to anyone seemed important. You'd watch her size them up, her eyes growing big and round, imagining herself in that person's shoes, like she was trying on their whole life in her mind or something, like when she found Earl. Abilene fancied him and all. You could tell by her gaze she would get all serious. Earl wore those blue button-down shirts, all crisp, no wrinkles, and he carried an attaché. She could pick them, Abilene. She chatted him up and was first to take his order before any of us other girls. Sometimes Earl would come in and have shrimp po' boy with a tall pitcher of sweet tea. And then other times he'd order fried catfish with turnip greens and potato salad. He'd make it interesting. She'd noticed when he called for pepper vinegar hot sauce, and the next time he came in, she brought it to him before he asked. Abilene was smart like that. She paid attention. When he complained, I don't like jalapeno peppers in my cornbread, she'd bring it back in the kitchen and pick them out herself. We waited on tables together at the diner that whole year during junior high. After our shift out back, Abilene would twirl in her wintergreen cotton dress, her flowy blonde hair making waves. She knew what might could. When we heard that she up and died, it took us for a shock. We never imagined anything could put her down or get in the way of where she was heading. I saw her picture on the TV. She'd changed. Something disappeared in me right then and there. Her blonde curls ratty and thin, and heavy black and blue welts under her eyes. She wasn't looking ahead anymore. They said she was on the run with Earl, one step ahead of the sheriff, until she wasn't. That big wad of cash, the one they won, it was thievery, they said. Sharpshooter took her down. Earl was let go. Said it was all her idea, Abilene's that is. He forked over some of the loot, but they never did find the rest of the haul. One day I got a letter in the mail with a key in it, no name, but it said, "For you, Bertie." That's what she used to call me on account of my long, skinny legs after the spoonbills on the river. No instructions. I knew it had to be from her. She sent me on a goose chase. I went to the financial institutions over in Lafayette, up to the one in Plaquemine, and a few years later, up as far as Tallulah. And that's when I found it, all of it. She kept me busy for a while, Abilene, kept me looking ahead. That's it.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Karen. That was gorgeous. Really, really lovely. Excuse me.
Karen, you know, Abilene, that sounds like my Aunt Abilene and my Uncle Earl.
That's exactly who I was writing about, yes.
Oh, loved it.
Okay, I'll introduce Niles next to read. Niles Reddick is author of a novel, 3 collections, and a novella. His work has been featured in over 500 publications, including the Saturday Evening Post, New Reader Magazine, Fourth Magazine, Citron Review, Newnham, Right Hand Pointing, and Vestal Review. He was a 4-time Pushcart, 3-time Best Micro, and 3-time Best of the Net nominee. His newest flash collection, If Not For You, was recently released by Big Table Publishing. Niles, over to you.
Hey, thank you so much, Sandra, and congratulations on the release of your newest novella, and I was honored to be able to endorse that and shared that on social media earlier this week. It is a lovely novella, and it brought back a lot of memories for me reading it. I wanted to read two flash pieces tonight, both under 400 words. The first one is titled Blame It on the Rain. And I had just recently written an article about Donna Fargo, who was a singer-songwriter back in the 70s. It's Happiest Girl and Funny Face and some others. Some of you may remember her. And I had just interviewed Donna and talked with her at length. And I wanted to incorporate something about her into a flash piece. So this just really appeared in my brain and I just wrote it down. So it's titled Blame It on the Rain. They wanted to go to town to shop for niceties, pick up needed supplies, maybe get an ice cream at the Tasty Freeze. But it had been raining for 3 days straight, and the grass in the yard sloshed when she went to check the mail. Mud slapped on her irises and lilies by the mailbox, thanks to that mailman who delivered in all kinds of weather but wasn't attentive because of the mud on her flowers, and the mailbox door left partially open. A steady drip had wet the electric bills, sales circulars, and the Daily Gazette, and she'd have to find a place to spread the mail out in the kitchen counter to dry among all of the clothes she couldn't hang on the line outside because of the rain, and because the dryer had been dead for 5 years straight after he left, and she couldn't afford another one. The rain, the weatherman said, would skip them because of some shift in westerly winds hadn't. And all of this time, her teenage daughter had been up there listening to some cassette she got in the mail from that tape club her daddy signed her up for. And she has rewound it about 100 times and listened to the same song over and over and over. And all things, the name of the song was Blame It on the Rain by some crazy jungle-looking men on the cover. And her mama thought if the Plymouth would make it to town, her daughter would leave that jungle tape behind because the Plymouth had an 8-track. And maybe she could pop in Donna Fargo and sing The Happiest Girl in the Whole USA, or Funny Face like they used to before he ran off to Atlanta and left them out here on his dead grandma's farm that wasn't worth squat on this dirt road that was mush, and her bald tires would probably get bogged down right out of the driveway. Maybe they could go next week when the rain was gone, the sun was high in the sky, and the check from her no-count cheat of a husband arrived. And I have to tell you, I don't know about that one or the next one, but the next one is titled Stinky's Fish Camp. Because of Karen, Karen said, if you don't use this for a title to a story, I'm going to use it or something when I went to the beach and I ate at a place called Stinky's Fish Camp. So anyway, I wrote this. This is, of course, fiction, but I used that title, Stinky's Fish Camp. The artist named Roger had signed the print in pencil in the bottom right-hand corner, but the letters seemed larger, loopier, like a female signature. I wondered what his last name was. The grandmother sipped her coffee and stared at the print, said it seemed like a sword next to a guy with no head. But I thought if it was anything, it was straight back chairs, mostly like stacked boxes, not completely square, in dark gray on the bottom, bleeding into orange, followed by blue with yellow on top, flanked on the left with curved backs. I imagine Roger had finished at least a bottle of Merlot while working on his brush strokes. The print had matte board around it, framed in a simple black plastic frame. The grandmother thought it looked good on the beige wall of the rented condo on 30A in Santa Rosa Beach. But when asked what the grandfather thought while clipping his nails onto the knockoff Persian rug in the living room, he said, "It doesn't mean shit." He got up, pulled it off the wall, and laughed when the back revealed a Hobby Lobby tag for $29.95. He rehung the frame print back on the hook, but it didn't catch, fell on the tile, and cracked the glass. We'll call the condo office and tell them, and they can add it to my credit card, but we know how much, just in case they try to overcharge me, he said. The price was less than the fried shrimp dinners with fries, slaw, and hush puppies, with bits of pepper and crawfish at Stinky's fish camp they'd devoured the night before. They'd listened to bluegrass band for an hour in the bait shop while they waited for their table, tapping their feet and flapping their arms, the most exercise either had had in a month. The grandfather added, they didn't have any abstract prints at Stinky's, just pictures of fish. His wife told them to get his clippings with the broom, but he told her he'd paid a hefty cleaning fee in the contract, and he aimed the condo cleaners would vacuum when they checked out the next morning before 10 a.m. But while bitching, he clipped his finger instead of his nail, and his finger squirted blood all over the rug, drained more down his hand and onto the rug, and they wrapped it in paper towels, but the red kept seeping through until he raised his arm up to stop the flow from his rat-poisoned blood thinner. Guess I'll have to buy a new rug too. See if you can turn it over and see if the price is there, he barked. Thank you.
Thank you, Niles. That was great.
Thank you, Sam.
Always love listening to you read as well. Love your accent. A really good story. Okay, the third reader is going to be Robert Scottelaro. Scotty. I'll read your bio. Robert Scottelaro is the author of 8 chapbooks and 6 full-length flash story collections. A new microfiction collection, Quick Adjustments, is due out later this year, Blue Light Press, and a book of 6-sentence stories in collaboration with Meg Pokras is scheduled for release in April of 2024 by Mad Hat Press. His work is included in Norton's Flash Fiction International, Flash Fiction America, and 6 Best Small Fictions and Best Microfiction Award anthologies. He is the recipient of Zone 3's Rainmaker Award in Poetry and the Blue Light Book Award for his fiction. With James Thomas, he has co-edited New Micro, Exceptionally Short Fiction by W.W. Norton and Co. Thank you, Scotty. So I think, Scotty, you're going to talk, and then Francine is going to read your work, right? Yeah. Okay.
I think Scotty was just going to say hello. Scotty, are you there?
I guess I had been muted. I just wanted to congratulate you, Sandra. Your book is brilliant. And I loved it, and doing it in all those different voices and so nuanced. It was incredible.
Thank you.
I'm thrilled to hear some of it in your own voice.
Mhm.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
So I'm going to read Robert's story, Scotty's story. It's called Niagara Falls, and it's a triptych told in 3 parts. Niagara Falls from his book Ways to Read the World, which is a book of triptychs. First one, high stakes. Picture a man of average stature and looks seated behind a woman of average stature and looks on a flight to New York from small Midwestern towns. Picture him telling her he's a high-stakes mogul on his way to put a bow on a deal involving an entire block of buildings. What he'd like her to imagine is skyscrapers. Picture him dressed, not as a real estate magnate, but more as a pig farmer on his way to church. Imagine him opening the small bag of peanuts delicately, as if he's unlocking the secrets in an ancient scroll. See her looking out the window down at shapes of land sculptured by distance into manageable puzzle pieces, saying, "It's so beautiful." Wisps of cloud pass and grow denser as he leans over her to look also, and a single peanut lands on her lap and on her dress, on a print of an elegant flower ever so slightly faded, only a bit out of season. "Wow," he says, "cool." And the word cool flaps around for a moment like a fish on a rock. Picture her watch with an askance glance at the peanut as the peanut rolls to the floor. Broken ice. Picture an inexpensive hotel in the city with an ice machine in the hall that no longer works properly. Picture them after a misshapen moment when he fumbles with a condom, puts it on backwards. Imagine what was empty space between them, remaining so. Picture a TV on a bit past the foot of the bed, an overzealous commercial announcer's voice like a madman's mantra they hardly hear, as she tells him she was once the Iowa State ice skating champion. "Gosh," she says, the trophy was as big as you needed. The trophy was so big you needed bodybuilders to lift it." Even though she ice skated only once in her life on a frozen lake her brother fell in. The sound of the ice cracking at first like cubes in a cold drink by a microphone, then thunderous as he crashed through. Some men forming a linked line, lying on their bellies to retrieve him. How that was the first and last time she wore skates. Picture how easily the words leave her lips, spill out like a falls, not Niagara, but her Niagara. Picture him saying "wow" without the cool this time, looking at her teeth. Imagine him thinking how a retainer, when she was young, would have spared her that overbite. Spring-loaded. Picture them going to Coney Island the next day, digging their feet into the sand, listening to the monosyllabic sea shanties the gulls are singing. Picture them watching the tide come in, go out, with their belladonna eyes, sea absent what Midwesterners possess when confronted with such wet, wavy vastness. He has a dental appliances convention to attend early next day, and his mind is meandering as a small cyclone might. He needs to call his wife. Imagines telling her of the wondrous new materials they've come up with for night guards. Picture the woman beside him digging those skate-phobic feet further into the sand to the cool spaces where the sand darkens. Imagine her thinking of her husband back home with the kids, thinking of the dull neckties he wears, mulch brown and dull end of autumn greens, always on crooked, how she straightens them on the way to church, how they always go back as if spring-loaded, crooked. But she can't wait to see that Broadway play with her younger sister, who moved to this hulking town. Imagine her thinking how badly the man beside her smells, never taking a shower afterwards. Imagine her recalling how he looked up at those skyscrapers, reverentially, as if they were holy, poking halfway into heaven. Some magnate. Imagine him turning and hoping she'll smile so he can see her teeth again. Picture her gazing at his open shirt, at his undershirt on backwards and inside out, at that little twisted label. Imagine the silence between them like a tightrope slackened and greased. Picture the gulls overhead getting every word right, the tide getting every word right. Thank you. It's Robert Scottelaro.
Thank you, Francine.
My pleasure, Scotty.
Thank you, Francine, and thank you for your story, Robert. Francine is next. I'll read out your bio. Francine Witte is a poet and flash fiction writer. Her newest flash fiction collection, Radio Water, is forthcoming from Roadside Press in January 2024. Her poetry collection, Some Distant Pin of Light, is forthcoming from Savannah Barber Press in summer 2023. She lives in New York City. Francine.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandra. And congratulations on your novella.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Actually, my bio, we moved the poetry book up to 2024. It was 2023, but it's 2024. So I'm going to read two pieces. And this first one's called Why You Can't Believe the Weather Report. No way, no how. It's still yesterday somewhere, almost tomorrow somewhere else. 1 minute you're getting a fistful of sunshine slamming you in the face. Next minute it's softened to butter. Time zones are the problem. Everything different everywhere else. And I'm trying to explain this to Charlie, who is always walking towards New Zealand, where it's tomorrow, and he'd be younger than everyone else. I tell him now is always now, the time isn't a butterfly, and he just nods and turns on the Weather Channel, watching for tornadoes in faraway places. Charlie is enough of a tornado for me, scooping me up in his love arms and slamming me down to the ground. Sometimes I wake up the next day. I am wreckage. I am bone twist. And look over there by the side of the road, my heart a pulsing pocketbook filled with how I could have hid from him in the bathtub. How 1 minute he is sunshine at 5 o'clock and next minute he's midnight. And I can have all the go bags I want and medicine and extra clothes and be ready to run at a moment's notice. But I look out the window, nothing but a stitch of cloud, and I can't tell how bad it will get because when I look at Charlie's eyes, nothing but soft blue hope, and there's no possible way I could have known. And I read that because Sandra's in New Zealand where it's tomorrow. It's tomorrow for me anyway. It's Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, right, Sandra? That just blows my mind. So, second one is called In a Providence Motel. He told her he had news and let's get away to Rhode Island. He told her he wanted the news to be separate from the rest of their lives. They took the train and checked into a papery motel. They sat all night, mildew and floral bedspread, her waiting and him nodding and close to speech. The morning light through the curtains fell across his face in a way that made him almost young. How he looked when she still loved him. I'm dying, he finally said, when the air would hold no more silence. She sipped the last of the drugstore wine. We all are, she said. Yes, but I really am, he said, something growing in my chest. Her mouth almost forming into I'm sorry. She never knew anymore what was true. She looked at the empty plastic cup and wished it were filled with coffee. Through the thin wall, the grunts of an early morning couple, she wondered if that's how he sounded when he slept with her sister. She looked again at the plastic cup and realized it would split open if it were filled with hot coffee. She looked at her husband, who still looked young and lovable in the morning light, which is almost always a terrible liar. Thank you. So once again, I want to thank Sandra. Sandra, you want to tell us how to get your book? Get a hold of your book. Do you have a link for it in the chat or like?
Yeah, I put a link in the chat page.
Okay, great. So we look forward to all buying your book and hearing more stories from you in the future. And thank you so much, and thank you to your readers, Karen, Niles, Scotty, and thank you for asking me. So, okay, we're going to continue now with the rest of the reading. Elan Barnehama's recent novel, Escape Route, set in 1960s New York City, follows teen teens Zach and Sam as they explore music, spirituality, politics, baseball, hope, and above all else, love. Barnehama's writing has appeared in numerous journals and public radio. Elan teaches college writing, has worked with at-risk youth, had a gig as a radio news guy, and did a mediocre job as a short order cook. Elan Barnehama. Elan? You need to take yourself
Yeah,
off
I'll
mute.
try that again.
Yeah.
I hit the button, it didn't work. Sorry. I was saying it was a pleasure to be introduced to your work, Sandra, and thank you all for having me. I'm read a short flash story, which is part of a new novel in progress. It was in Sage Cigarette a little while ago, called Breath. At 40, I turned to marathons. Though I'd been running daily for decades, I'd never given marathons much thought. But that day, I took turns that expanded my 10-mile route to 14 to 18, which quickly became 22, and I felt great. I never expected to celebrate my 40th birthday. I'd been raised on stories of those camps that were not camp, the ones with the ovens and gas chambers. During my grade school years, I was told that seeking shelter under my desk would ensure that I survived a Soviet Union nuclear attack. And my high school years came with the possible prize of winning a Vietnam War draft lottery. And if somehow I survived all of those, the collective global disregard for diminishing natural resources would surely end life on Earth. So 40 may as well have been 100. I started running soon after my sister Emma's suicide. Started right after her Shiva ended, when the house was emptied of visitors and my parents returned to their regular routines, and I returned to high school. I don't know why I started running home from school, I just did. Maybe I was trying to avoid talking to people about Emma. I continued this habit every day till summer vacation, when I set out from my house and ran through the streets of the neighborhood. It was often pointed out to me that Emma and I were very much alike. We did, after all, share the same parents and the same DNA. I was aware that she liked running and had run track in high school. I wondered if that was why I started running. I also wondered if it meant that I too would take my life someday. What I did not wonder about was that lacing up my sneakers gave me time away from the expectations of daily life. It allowed me to be in my own world. Running was the only thing that saved me from my darkest self. And as summers went on, I got comfortable with my breath. I had never done anything that hit me as hard as running, and it set a new bar for what I considered meaningful. With my breathing deep and rhythmic, it rebuffed life's loneliness and life's isolation. The Hebrew word for breath is ruach, which also means wind or spirit. Toward the end of the summer, I found Emma while running. We had great conversations. Yes, I knew she wasn't there, but I also knew she was. And I knew I would not end my life like Emma because she told me. In college, during my Kerouac days, I took up smoking Lucky Stripes and stopped running. A month later, I was late for class and started to race. 40 steps in, I bent over, wheezing and coughing, out of control. That was my last cigarette. The next day, I was back to running. I started slow, doing laps on the indoor track that required 16 orbits to log a mile. I could never keep count. When I got my lungs back, I went outside and rediscovered my breath. I got myself back and didn't plan on letting go ever again. And I got Emma back. Man, was she pissed about the smoking thing. And then came 40 and my need to go further without explanation. The rabbi suggested that one wait till 40 to study Kabbalah, an exploration of life's mysteries. They argued that one needed to have life experience before one studied it. Maybe the marathon was my Kabbalah. I decided to experience marathons and let the why remain a mystery. I mapped out and ran 3 over the course of the next 2 months and then signed up for an official one. It was better than good. I liked running alone in the company of strangers. After that, I couldn't stop. I used marathons as an excuse to travel, arriving days early and exploring the new locations on my taper days. Each time I stepped out the door of an unfamiliar place, the names of streets and coffee shops and diners and people previously unknown to me, they quickly became part of the legacy of all my runs, of all the paths I have crossed, of all the people I had never known. My running self left no one and no place behind. My running self always had Emma. Thank you.
Beautiful, Elan. Just want to make sure I'm okay. Thank you very much, Elan Barnehama. Okay, next up we have Cindy Rosmus. Cindy Rosmus is originally from the Ironbound section of Newark, New Jersey, once voted the unfriendliest city on the planet, and it shows in her writing. She is the editor, art director of the crime fiction webzine Yellow Mama, which is a hoot, by the way, as
Thank
is
you.
Cindy. Cindy's a
Thank
hoot. Cindy Rasmus, take it away.
Thank you. And thank you all for having me come. And Sandra, it's always a pleasure seeing and hearing you. I'm going to read a short flash piece, which flash is always short, but this is under 500 words, and a poem. The story is called Little Boy Noir. She hit it again, like I'm stupid. For a cop, she sure is. Always moving it like she can trick me. I never forgot how it felt that time I'd held it. I was only 4, but it was heavy for my small hands. A 38 she had back then. Left it on the bed like a dope. She was upset over some guy at that beat-up house down the Jersey Shore. Who brings your 4-year-old to a shore house where everybody's drunk and having sex? Who leaves your gun on the bed? Keith, she'd screamed. Baby! Her arms open wide. Those 2 things I remembered. Holding her 38 in my 4-year-old hands and the one time she'd wanted a hug. To get my mind off the gun. Now I'm 9, so I know better. All that shit on the news, dumb kids shooting each other by accident. Yeah, right. 4 or not, I would have figured out how to. Maybe 10 more minutes if she hadn't freaked out. Maybe longer, as back then time went on forever. No accident. Except for me. She never wanted me. Hated my dad, and I was Dad's mini-me. Same sloppy hair, close-set eyes, and I bet the same mouth. Even when you smile, she told me, you look mad at the world. Like it was Dad eating Frosted Flakes, not me. Dad, who I heard punched her belly so hard they almost lost me. An accident. Not for me. I knew too much. Sneaked onto sites banter kids, some even crazier than me. Like at school, I learned ways. There were lots of different guns. One even with a safety I could press that trigger so hard through the stroke I could make it work. With my bigger, older, stronger hands. I'll find this one. On top of the fridge, they're lined up. Special K's, Chex, those shredded grains that look like you ate them already. All the cereals I hate, next to the pitted prunes and rice cakes. Rice cakes? Why not eat styrofoam? Shit out your last meal and spread it on that. That's where she hid it, I bet. Behind everything I would never eat. Like, who'd drag a chair across the room to reach rice cakes? She's at work now on the night shift, in the squad car with some snot-nosed rookie. Babysitter's in the next room deep in her phone. Outside it's pouring. Streets looking like they're drenched with ink, or liquid gunpowder, if that even exists. As I dragged the chair over the kitchen floor, I thought how much my hands had changed in 5 years. How if this is just the right gun, an older, stronger finger might really squeeze that trigger. And how this time she'd be proud. Thank you. The poem, it's called Lavender. Always hated it. Washed out purple, needy, insecure, that cloying scent, like an old lady's sachet. Sachets. Who the fuck uses them? Maybe in Victorian England they masked the stench of dead people chicks took photos with. Old chicks. You're giving me lavender soaps, candles, what might be dusting powder. Makes me puke. Makes me feel old. My skin crinkles, bones crack. Just send me to the glue factory, you fuck. Like I can't get laid. Like I just sit in the window drunk, surrounded by cats, watching neighbors take out the trash. Even with old cat litter, mine smells the best on the block. Thanks to lavender. Aromatherapy. If it should calm me, why am I scared? Picturing my death. Clothes cat out the back. A satin pillow for my brainless head. And sitting up front, the Grim Reaper. in a faded purple hoodie. Nobody else. Thank you.
That was awesome, Cindy. Great as
Thank you.
always. Yeah. Thank you, Cindy Rosmus. Next, Zvi Sesling. Zvi A. Sesling was Brookline, Massachusetts' Poet Laureate 2017 to 2020. He has published numerous poems and flash fiction. He edits Muddy River Poetry Review and 10 by 10 flash fiction stories. His work has won international prizes and nominated for local and national awards. He is a 5-time Pushcart Prize nominee. He has published 4 volumes of poetry and 3 poetry chapbooks. His flash fiction book is Secret Behind the Gate, and his flash fiction chapbook is Wheels. He lives in Brookline with his wife, Susan J. Victor. Zvi Sesling.
Thank you, Francine, and thank you all. I'll read 27 very short ones. Francine gave me an hour and a quarter. I'm kidding, I'm kidding. The first one is called, Are We the Only Ones? I read a magazine article the other day claiming the Milky Way galaxy has 100 billion planets, maybe 200 billion. That made me wonder if we are the only planet where we go to work every day and deal with rush hour traffic jams. My next one is a quick way to learn how to ride a bicycle. I'm 6 years old in the first grade, and my father sits me atop my first bicycle. He holds the handlebars and the back of the seat, running alongside before pushing and yells, hold on, don't fall. Somehow I keep myself upright as I hurtle down a small hill, off the sidewalk and across the street, where I bounce over the curb into the side of a building. My dad yells, turn, turn. So I steer left and he yells, pedal, pedal. As I try pushing the pedals, he suddenly yells, brake, brake. But I don't know how to brake. So I steer toward a fire hydrant. My aim is good. I go over the handlebars and the fire hydrant, then bounce off a parked car, land on the sidewalk, get scrapes and bruises like someone gathering wildflowers. And my father says, next time it'll be easier. This one is called History of Football. On the first day, the Almighty creates a football field with an end zone at each end. When he sees what he has done, he thinks, this is good. On the second day, the Almighty creates goalposts and stadiums for worshipers to attend. On the third day, he puts stripes on the field with a number of yards from the end zone. On the fourth day, he creates 2 combative teams, and on the fifth day, he creates the forward pass. On the sixth day, he creates field goals and touchdowns and coaches and referees and televisions to watch the competition between 2 teams. On the seventh day, he sits on the couch, places his feet on an ottoman, invents bowls of popcorn and potato chips, pops open a bottle of beer, burps a few times, raises both arms and cheers for every touchdown. And this will be the last one. It's called A Dime's Worth. The way Jack tells it, he is in his first job out of the armed forces, back from Vietnam, with 2 bullet holes still healing. His late 60s, and he's glad to be out of the military because he cannot stand taking orders or having the enemy pump bullets into him. He searches the help wanted pages and lands a job with Carter Omega Advertising and Public Relations. His boss, Herbert, gives him 2 small accounts with which he does so well that Herbert gives him the Odyssey computers at $100,000 account from which he makes 10%, and that's a lot more than the military. Anyway, as Jack tells it, Odyssey wants to increase its advertising and public relations to $1 million and invites Carter Omega and 5 other companies to develop the next level strategy and campaign. As Jack tells it, he's paid 15 grand a year and his boss drives a $40,000 car with all the bells and whistles. Herbert tells him to draw up an outstanding strategy campaign. Jack says he does, but Herbert does not like it, so he creates a new one. They go to the presentation and lose out to Mason, Cork, and Villa. Back in the office, Herbert calls everyone to his office and screams they are idiots and should all be fired, and singles out Jack by saying, guys like him, like you, come a dime a dozen. As Jack tells it, he reaches into his pocket, pulls out a dime, which he flips on Herbert's desk and tells him to go buy a dozen. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, Zvi. Very entertaining as always.
Thank you, Francine.
Zvi Sesling. Okay, and I also want to recommend to all the readers, look in the chat. People are like making really nice comments while you read. You can't look at it while you're reading, but afterwards take a look, and I think it'll make you feel really good. And everybody else, keep those comments coming because they really do make people feel good, and they're well deserved. Next we have Phil Temples. Phil is a product of the Midwest, but he's lived in the greater Boston area for the past 40 years. Phil has published 5 mystery thriller novels, a novella, and 4 story anthologies, in addition to over 220 online short stories. Phil Temples.
Thank you very much, Francine. Good evening, everybody. And Sandra, again, congratulations on the novella. It's fantastic. I'd like to read a couple of micro pieces here that appeared in Watertown Lit Squad's Poets and Writers Sampler. I know my background is fade. Probably can't make that out very well. Edited by DeWitt Henry, local writer here. First micro is entitled Wishing Well. Bernadette met Peter at the old wishing well at the appointed time. She sat down with him on the well's edge. Peter held her hand and smiled at her warmly. Do you know what I'm wishing for right now? Peter never got the opportunity to speak because Bernadette's wish came true first. Next one is entitled When Your Girl Has Left You. Clyde takes aim at the shit stain with his piss. Try as he might, he cannot dislodge the hardened fecal matter on the side of the rim. He yells for Julie to come clean the toilet bowl. His command is met with a deafening silence. Next story is called Justice. Probably my shortest one. Hot dang, good shot, Bubba. Shit, that thar is just a tiny little baby alien. Now, where do you suppose its mama is hiding? Bubba? Bubba? Next story is called Inner Child. Friends encouraged him to let his inner child loose, so he did. The little bastard ditched his business suit, pierced his tongue, and joined a heavy metal band. Next story is called Blue. The lobsterman was hauling up his pots off George's bank when, to his astonishment, he discovered one of them contained a blue lobster. He knew the odds of catching a blue were 1 in a million. To his dismay, this lobster was not a keeper. It was a juvenile, and the length of its carapace was barely 2 inches. It was well under the legal limit. What a shame, thought the lobsterman. Had it been an adult, some city slicker couple would have paid an exorbitant price to own it as a novelty. They'd keep it in their seawater aquarium and show it off to their high society friends at parties. More than likely, after a few months, they would have tired of its beauty, Then they would board their fancy yacht with their animal rights friends and release it back into the ocean to great fanfare. The man studied the lobster for a moment. Then he took out his smartphone and snapped pictures of the trophy before bending over the side and gently releasing it back into the ocean depths. Next time, he thought. As the juvenile lobster settled within a few feet of the bottom, it was spotted by a hungry dogfish. The fish didn't care that its next meal was under 3.25 inches, or that it was blue. And thank you, go online here to a story that's not been published yet, entitled Turbulence. And I wish I could do a British accent, but I can't. Lanky Kid was always trying to impress the others by showing off his ability to fly. You couldn't really call it flying. I suppose it was more like levitating. Lanky Kid would squat low to the ground, sit real still, shut his eyes tightly, and then make a face like he was trying to fart. A few seconds later, his entire body would rise a couple of feet off the ground. He could stay that way for minutes at a time. Bet you can't do that, can you? He mocked. Brilliant, I replied in a deadpan voice. I must admit, it was totally brilliant the first time or two, but after the fourth or fifth time, I found it boring and I told him so. That cheesed him off. You're just a gormless bloke, he told me. I bet you don't have any superpowers. I bet you can't run fast or jump high or throw a ball for a mile. I was getting tired of Lanky Kid baiting me. No, but I bet you can't do this. I dropped my trousers, bent over, pointed my arse at him, and Pratt Wids in one tremendous explosion. The odoriferous gust caused Lanky Kid to lose his balance, and the force threw him against a row of nearby trash cans. He looked up at me from the ground, dumbstruck. Now that's what I call flying, I said. Thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't get off of unmute. Sorry about that, Phil. Thank you so much, Phil. Those were wonderful and very entertaining. Thank you for coming. We have just such a great roster tonight. You know, Paul's reading really attracts, I think, the best readers. So thank you all for being here. Next, we're going to hear from David Galef.
Thank you.
Has published extremely short fiction in the collection Laugh Track and My Date with the Neanderthal Woman, extremely long fiction in the novels Flesh, Turning Japanese, and How to Cope with Suburban Stress, and a lot in between. He's also the editor at Bestseller Review. David Galef.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try reading off the screen and hope that works. This is simply called Setting Exercise. It's a regulation size flash fiction at around 700 words. Setting exercise. Dr. Phelps, our creative writing instructor, told us to use setting in our fiction. She said that it can be a rich source for narrative. For my setting, I decided to use Kevin's body. Write about what you know, Phelps always says. I figure I know that part of Kevin better than any dumb landscape. It began when Kevin's roommate, Tom's girlfriend, Sherry, had an extra ticket for Smush, and we double dated. It was a great concert, 3 encores. Sherry and Tom split up right after that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Keep the chronology clear, Phelps told us. All during dinner at Olive Garden, Kevin seemed full of possibility in a dirty bad boy way that I kind of like. At the concert, when Kevin's arm brushed against mine, it felt fuzzy. My arms are actually hairier than his, which are like the thinnest carpet of down, a place you could sleep if you were only an inch tall. After the concert and a bottle of Stoli, we swapped spit for a while. Kevin's lips are as plush as my Aunt Connie's old sofa, the one she gave to Goodwill last year. His mouth is an upholstered red cave, but without stalactites, ripe for exploring. Thick tongue, God, what a thick tongue. Phelps told us to go for metaphor, but Kevin's tongue left me speechless. maybe a little too much, if you know what I mean, but still friendly, slick, and playful, like a well-meaning otter. I texted him 3 kiss emojis even before I got home. The next time we went to dinner at Texacali Rose. I'm antsy, but I don't mean like a bug. Over a pitcher of margaritas and shrimp fajitas, always feed the reader something, he proposed. His proposal was simple. Want to mess around? I'd have said hook up, but sure. So after dinner, we headed for Kevin's apartment. Tom was out that evening. We could have gone to my place, except that I'm still living at home in Clinton. Clinton is not a setting worth writing about. We settled down on the couch, and I learned more about the lay of the land. Kevin's armpits sprout what looks like brown pampas grass, which poke out sometimes, even with his arms crossed. On a hot day, and this was that, they have the pretty stink of frying onions. Phelps said to use all 5 senses. Kevin also has a brown mole on the left side of his neck. When I licked there, it tasted salty as a pretzel. He put his hand on my breast. I could have written tit or boob, but those terms are demeaning. Phelps agrees with me on this. I gave him a reassuring squeeze on his butt, which has the smooth curve of a playground ball I once owned. But one day this big kid, Hannah Jackson, kicked it into traffic. Phelps told us to build on childhood memories whenever we could. Kevin mimicked me, cupping my left butt cheek, but then not moving much. So after a minute, I decided to get things going and slid his hand to the front. I pulled it downward and insert whatever metaphor you like. His hand contracted like an inchworm, which felt good, but then it made me lay there like a slug, creeping off center. I corrected his course, but he kept missing the spot, like he needed Google Maps or something. If you get too graphic, you lose some of your audience. Finally, he looked up at me. I know it's cliche, deer in headlights, but he really did look like a fawn, wide eyes and all. How could I have so misjudged his backstory? Hey, I held him in my arms. I don't mean to be rude or anything, but this is your first time, isn't it? He nodded miserably. When he did that, he looked 12 years old. So we just lay on his bed, and he told funny little stories about not getting any. I guess those could be thematic if I revise this draft. Kevin has real potential. I want our story to be memorable, something to write about, which just goes to show that Phelps was right. Know your setting. Figure out your characters. The plot depends on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David Galef. And if you thought that that story was funny, well, David actually led a panel on using humor in flash fiction at AWP last year, and I had the honor of being part of that. So, you know, he's actually, you know, leading panels on humor. So, and also, I mentioned in his bio that he's the editor of Bestseller Review, and that's, if I'm not mistaken, that's like the oldest online journal.
We have that honor in continuous operation since 2000.
That's
So we have
amazing.
that going for us. And may I point out that we published a really cool piece by Francine a little while ago.
Thank you so much.
And people I'm probably forgetting.
Thank you. Well, wonderful to have you, David, and it's a great story. Okay, our next reader is Gary Fincke, and I also want to say that today is not only Sandra's book launch, but elsewhere, the Best Microfiction 2023 is being launched, and Gary Fincke is, along with Meg Pokris, wonderful Meg Pokris, the series editors, and they're having it's a launch. It's an interesting launch that goes on all day. It's on Facebook. If you go to the Best Microfiction, did I say Best Small Fiction? Best Microfiction page, and go to the event, you can find it. And it's just clips of people reading their stories. So it's asynchronous. You don't have to, it's not a live event, but it's wonderful to hear all the stories. So that's one of many Gary's many endeavors. Gary Gary Fink's new collection of flash fiction, The Corridors of Longing, was published by Pelicanesis Press in 2022. His long-form story collections have won the Flannery O'Connor Prize and the Elixir Press Prize. He's co-editor of the annual anthology Best Microfiction. Gary Fink.
Thanks, Francine. Thanks, Francine. I'm gonna read two stories. One's kind of
Wait. Hang on. Gary, you're not.
okay.
Could you,
Anyway,
could you
I
start
didn't
over
say
again?
anything.
Yeah, just start over again.
Just happened here. I didn't say anything important anyway. So you didn't miss a thing. But I'm gonna read two stories. The first one's about to appear in Fractured Lit. I'll give the journal a plug. It's called Albatross. After 25 years and an hour of cash bar drinks, the ballroom-sized venue is stuffed with chatter and assessment. From classmate to classmate, you listen to the stories fat with nostalgia or self-regard, all of them rooted in achievement. You nod and smile and sometimes spew your own stories, pleased by the attention. Your wife, who graduated 1,000 miles from here, has swum down for the evening. As if she is here to discover your past, she listens more closely than you to what your classmates say. She follows your eyes from woman to woman. More than an hour it takes for the classmate you dreamed about in biology, chemistry, and physics to reach you. After graduation, all summer at the pool, she was a lifeguard, but you only imagined her in a swimsuit because you worked a union factory job. Also, if you were honest, because you couldn't swim. Regardless, your wife is comparing her to the yearbook photos you have shown her more than once. You feel 16 again, nearly afraid, but she talks as if you were more than a dreamer, plunging into her story about another boy who could not swim. Hand over hand, she says, that boy must have edged to deep water along the dock that claimed part of a lake for the summer camp where she worked after college. No matter the reason, he'd lost his grip and gone under while she'd scolded another boy for running, adding a minute between her whistles for buddy checks. Last warning, she quotes herself saying to the running boy, don't let me see that again. For 22 years now, she says, her dreams often have soundtracks of whistles and screams. Always there is water with shadow, a still life. She wakes with what feels like a heavy weight yoked over her arms. Twice each night, she rises to check the breathing of her 4 children who sleep paired in 2 rooms. A trilling in her ears insists that she evaluate the pillows, examine the chests for the temporary relief of rise and fall. You don't mention a word about how, though you still can't swim, you've practiced CPR on a dummy called Mike Muscles, bringing him back from the dead with your hands and breath because you coach something as landlocked as a tennis team. Imagine yourself watching a boy dragged from a swimming pool, the class instructor had told you. Imagine your well-trained hands on his chest is the only way to resurrect him. Now, you don't say a word at all, but you notice she is looking at your name tag, her mouth forming and then reforming the 3 difficult syllables of your last name. As she begins to turn away, your wife says, Michael and I are both so sorry. The woman lays one hand on your wife's arm. Safety is impossible, she says, her voice hushed as if speaking only to your wife. There's no shame in the inability to comfort. And this other one, as I said, is going to be in 100-word story one of these days. I don't know how they schedule. Another point of view, how my mother posed me. The photographer instructs my mother to hide under the dark maroon blanket to hold her infant still. It takes time and quiet for your darling to be perfect, he says. In all of his portraits, she sees that nothing disguises the shape of the mothers, the way the cloth narrows at their heads, the taut geometry of their laps. Regardless, she lets him cover her and cradles my body through cotton. Loose threads stroke her face. She sweats throughout the lengthy shot, laboring in the darkness to aid the wonder of permanence, holding her breath to become inanimate for love. Thank you all.
Wonderful, Gary, as always. Gary Fincke. And do check out the Facebook event if you can. It's probably going on until a little bit later, right, Gary?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You know, I've watched about 15 of these today.
Okay.
There's lots of speakers. There's probably another 15 since I saw it earlier.
Yeah, it's like some of the readers just uploaded videos of them reading their stories.
Yes.
And it's really great. It's a great way to hear the stories and so on. And also, if you get a chance, buy this microfiction. That's the best way. So, anyway, and everybody, please feel free. Like as I said before, put your links in the chat. How to buy your books, whatever whatever you'd like to sell us, because it's important, right? It's not why we write, but it's not why we write. Okay. So thank you, Gary Fincke. Next we have Andrea Marcusa. Andrea Marcusa's writings have appeared in the Gettysburg Review, River Teed, New Flash Fiction Review, Citron Review, and others. She's received recognition in a range of competitions, including Smoke Long, Cleaver, Raleigh Review, Best Microfiction, and others. She's a member of the faculty at the Writers Studio. Andrea Marcusa.
Thank you so much, Francine. And Sandra, I ordered your book. I'm looking forward to reading it. It showed up on Amazon, so that's always easy. And I've got to say, I'm just blown away by the readings tonight. So it's wonderful to be part of all of this. I normally write extremely short. This is flash, but it's a little longer than usual. So bear with me. I think it'll be worth it. I hope. Okay, this is called No Way to Help. When she heard the needy chirp of the child, Cheryl scanned the subway station and noticed the little boy. His voice sounded innocent and tender compared to the low grunts of the three other boys. She didn't overtly stare. She gave an, "I'm just a passenger sitting on a bench looking down the subway platform train look." A pose she'd mastered during years of city living. Her sister, Tina, always called her overcautious. "You have a right to look where you want to, especially at a bunch of kids making a ton of noise," she'd have said if she'd been there. All New Yorkers knew the subway rule: don't stare, especially in a heat wave when violence spiked along with the temperature. Today, it would hit 101 degrees. The boy was slight, small-shouldered. The others stood taller, were burlier, and yelled like rowdy hyenas. Her eyes lingered on him. He kept trying to nose himself into the group like the runt of a litter. Withering heat engulfed the station, surpassing even the stifling humidity of teeming Times Square outside. A sinister darkness cast a pall on everything because of missing lights overhead. If there was a teacher or grown-up in charge of the group, they were MIA. The boy scurried back and forth between the two sets of tracks, one for the local train, the other for the express. It was a miracle none of them had slipped and fallen onto the third rail. Cheryl mopped her forehead, then stole another glance. Her eyes locked on the small boy as the shoving and elbowing intensified. The usual roughhousing, she told herself, but not really. Someone was about to get hurt. She could sense it in the rising clamor. Two of the larger boys had balled their hands into tight fists. She wanted to warn the little boy, protect him from what she was sure was about to unfold, to shield him from what she'd been through, so he wouldn't grow up to be like her, distrustful, wary, separate. More of Tina's words chide her. When are you going to get over things that happened to you years ago and get rid of that wall you have around you? But what if she had read things wrong? Cheryl turned to the jolly woman slouched beside her. Do you think that little kid's okay? The woman looked up from her phone, glanced at the group, shrugged, and turned away. Don't read into things. Not everyone is like you. You don't know when to leave things alone. Tina's critical. But Cheryl knew when she sensed danger. She learned it at an early age to take cover, even if she didn't always follow it. She felt it in every tense muscle, the galloping hooves in her chest. The boys continued to holler and howl. The tallest one sank a punch into the little boy's back. Cheryl flinched. It was as if his knuckles had landed on her spine and sent hot sparks all the way to her fingers and toes. The boys laughed and whooped, except for the little one, who winced from its vicious force, then quickly shrugged it off like a joke, laughing. Cheryl had done that as a child, anything to avoid the label crybaby. The woman beside Cheryl glanced again down the platform. You a social worker or something? No, but that little kid looks so young. He looked skinny, like he wasn't eating enough or didn't have enough to eat. His pants were cinched and baggy and held with a rope tied at the waist. When he bent over, every bone in his back showed. The woman observed them and said, You know kids. For Cheryl, it was more than just kids. The other boys were sturdier. One sported new sneakers. The bigger ones seemed to float on a force of their collective energy, moving as one. The younger boy, despite the slug, kept trying to find a way back into their cloud of power. As the youngest of five, Cheryl knew that impulse well. She'd have done anything for acceptance, always trying so hard and falling short, never fast enough or big enough. Brat baby, pest, booger, the names they called her. She knew the little boy's efforts were a lost cause. Those kids would never let her in. Don't interfere, she told herself. But how could she not? She still remembered the bloody mouth and broken front tooth from her childhood tumble. Her sisters sent her down a flight of stairs on a tricycle. She ran her tongue across the scar that still snaked on the inside of her front lip. It had been a dog day like today. They were bored and hot, waiting to go to the town pool. An announcement blared. The local was a minute away. The woman who'd been seated beside Cheryl stood up to wait. The train rumbled in and the kids edged towards it. People spilled out. Cool air from the train AC blew towards her. Two of the big boys boarded the car and the third stayed behind and held back the little boy. Just when the doors were closing, he knocked the boy so he tumbled sideways onto the concrete. Then the older one vaulted onto the train. The doors thudded shut, separating the smaller one from the others. The boys hooted and smirked and sniggered at him through the window as the train clattered uptown. Alone on the platform, the boy, head downcast, paced. This was too much for Cheryl. She couldn't bear to see the child humiliated and left behind. Those boys had been cruel. She felt like kicking each of them in the shins. The platform had since filled with passengers. The kid was so small, she had trouble keeping him in her sights. When she reached the boy, he shot her a wary look. His knees were grimy, A ruddy scab marred his cheek. She bent down. Are you okay? His expression turned stony, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something, a wildness akin to a fallen baby bird searching for its nest. She tried again. Can I help you? No. You sure? She was about to offer to call someone when he leaned towards her. She could feel his boy breath on her face. Get out of my face, bitch. And with that, he turned, sped up the subway steps, and disappeared. Cheryl grew still and felt all eyes in the station jeering her, even though no one had noticed. As the train thundered in, she stood frozen, and her mouth filled with a metallic taste. It reminded her of the blood that had gushed from her lip on that scorching day years ago. She'd trusted her sisters, let them give her a push, and then tumbled, her bike tipping while she screamed, terrified and powerless to stop its descent, until her face and mouth thudded on the bottom cement step. She, too, had acted tough that day. She knew if she'd given in to her terror and hurt and cried and tattled, that her sisters would snub her, and their mother would keep them all home from the pool, which would feel like punishment. So she kept quiet, held a wet cold cloth to her mouth until the bleeding eased. It was as if it had all happened yesterday. While travelers filled the subway cars, the boy's words burned on her face. She watched her train pull in, a current of shock from the boy's harsh words still ricocheting within her. Glancing back at the stairway, she ached for that boy. He was so small and young, and yet had already become so tough, even tougher, she thought, than she had been. She imagined the betrayal and shame he must have felt as he made his way all alone through the thick crowds of Times Square, his slight frame being shoved and knocked. The sirens, the honks, the shouts, all mocking. Thank you.
Wow, that was so powerful.
Thank you.
Wonderful, Andrea. Andrea Marcusa. So we're coming to the home stretch here. We have 4 readers left, and we're going to hear from Bill Merklee. Bill Merklee's work appears in Best Microfiction 2021 and was nominated for Best Small Fictions 2022. His novella in Flash is finally finished, and a whole new hell has begun. He lives in New Jersey. Bill Merklee.
Thank you, Francine. And congratulations, Sandra. I look forward to reading the novella. This is a micro that was published in Cabinet of Heed a while back. It's called Cupcakes. Our neighborhood on East 59th Street was an urban backwater, a still pool off the main drag where everything and everybody swirled slow and lazy. As kids, we hoped, no, we knew, one day we'd catch the current of Kennedy Boulevard and be swept away forever. Sundays were the worst. Once noon mass let out, most people got raptured away to their kitchens and living rooms or to some out-of-town relatives. Real ghost town outside. TV was dull after the Bowery Boys finished their routines. Whatever Mom cooked always involved boiling water that steamed up the windows, made the apartment feel even smaller. This Sunday was like every other one. The corner store was closed. Me and my friends Dwayne and Izzy stood at the glass door, coveting the Hostess cupcakes resting on wire racks just beyond the doorway. Cream-filled devil's food delight with white swirls on top of chocolate icing, taunting us from the store's dusty shadows. I was 5, Dwayne and Izzy were 6. If we bust the window, we could get some cupcakes, I said. Dwayne went round the side of the store to the gravel parking lot and came back with the corner of a cinder block and heaved it through the door. The glass shattered the day like a starting gun. Izzy was in and out and down the street before anyone else showed up. Dwayne just stood there expecting thanks. I stepped back saying, "Look what somebody did." The dads paid for the door. I was still allowed in the place, but I never saw the other two after that. Some of us really did manage to get out of that neighborhood. I heard Dwayne was somebody's bagman when he got killed. Izzy's probably in office or in jail. Me? I've always been an idea guy. I do all right. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bill. Bill Merklee. Wonderful. Our next reader is Brad Rose. Brad Rose was born and raised in Los Angeles and lives in Boston. He is the author of 5 collections of poetry and flash fiction: Lucky Animals, No Wait, I Can Explain, Pink X-Ray, Detonations, and Momentary Turbulence. 7 times nominated for a Pushcart Prize and 3 times nominated for Best of the Net Anthology. Brad's poetry and fiction have appeared in the Los Angeles Times, the American Journal of Poetry, the South Florida Poetry Journal, New York Quarterly, Porto del Sol, Clock House, Folio, and other publications. More information than anyone could possibly want to know about him is available on his website, bradrosepoetry.com. Brad Rose.
Thank you, Francine. That was lovely. I made that all up, actually. First, I want to thank Sandra for having me here as well, and congratulate her on her great story. I mean, her book. I really love the title and bones of this story. 1,000 years ago, I used to work on the railway, and so I can kind of relate to some of the danger that's that you really captured there. Okay, so I'm going to read 3 pieces if I can find them. They're really together. I think they're about 350 words. They're a paragraph each. The first one is called, excuse me, School Picnic. The ants brought their own lunch, and who can blame them? We should give them the benefit of the doubt, at least until the poison takes effect. Meanwhile, the birds, those feathered heathens, cut down the trees. No, just the tall ones. Evidently, the sky is the limit. Mr. Jackson, our 8th grade teacher, says, subject, object, verb, and don't you ever forget it. Sure, it feels like a linguistic punishment, but it's a lot less stentorian than his usual didactic yodeling. All I can say is thank goodness for my secret powers. In my wicked, chilly red wingtips, I'm twisting and shouting faster than a Saturday night church fire. Fortunately, it's never too late for dissociation. In fact, the World Economic Forum says you can still make globalization work for you. Evidently, there's a thriving market for human remains. Say, do you prefer cherry or apple pie with that? Next one is called Hat Store Window. Thanks to my invisibility cloak, I'm enjoying the darkness. You know me, if I could, I'd dance the night away. In fact, because I'm no longer afraid of the devil's cartoons, I'm planning a trip to the real Disneyland. In merely 3 short weeks, anyone on the internet can learn to speak a new language. It's a small world after all. Just imagine your internal organs. Of course, not your appendix, that useless little finger buried deep in your slippery belly. That's much too ugly. Although like extraterrestrial intelligence, there's got to be a logical explanation. You probably think you know exactly where this is going. Appearances can be deceiving. In my opinion, your dainty head belongs in a hat store window. So come on in. Have a seat. Any seat. No, not that seat. Next one is called, the final one is called New Neighborhood. You know those apartment-sized giraffes? Yeah, the housebroken ones with the shorter necks. They'll eat you out of house and home. Naturally, it's hard to tell whether they've got a scratch or an itch, but I like to agree with everyone. One size fits all is my motto. Last night, I took a walk in the dark rain, but the drops were so detailed, I could hardly keep track. Everything is so left-handed in my new neighborhood. Not like my old place on Rattlesnake Hill. No, it wasn't a problem there at all, as long as I wore my high-top snake stompers. Although from now on, I'm only going to spend time with people who share my views of body positivity. Just because my TV shouts those secret messages at me doesn't mean I like to scare people I haven't met yet. Say, you don't think this t-shirt makes me look too muscular, do you? Thank you.
Wonderful as always, Brad, really. So we have just 2 more readers, and the great thing about Zoom is that you don't have to pay your bar tab, okay? And you don't have to beat the traffic. Win-win, I say. So our next reader, Daniel Galef, his first book is Imaginary Sonnets, published 2023 from Word Galaxy Able Muse Press. His flash fiction has appeared in the Indiana Review, Juked, and the Best Small Fictions Anthology. Daniel Galef.
Thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to read a handful of really short ones. This first one, I think I may have done at a reading several years ago, but it's got some new relevance. I don't know if anyone is following the Barbie Oppenheimer phenomenon, but this was published in Juked, and it's based on an anecdote in Richard Feynman's memoirs after the Los Alamos Trinity Project. It's called Break, Blow, Burn. You couldn't know how optimistic and lucky you've been, all. We actually worked on the thing. Champagne in the desert, eyes still readjusting, the world singing day-night like an eclipse. It was the first time I didn't flinch when the cork popped out. Afterwards, we scattered like fallout, some to Rand, to NASA. Some hanged up their aprons for unbloodied academics, fat men lecturing to little boys. No point if there isn't time to grow up. The mushrooms were all over then, like real mushrooms, or grass. Tried those, didn't work. Flicks, comics, the Twilight Zone. After Pigs in '63, I guess none of us thought she had another decade left in her. Understand, at the start, we didn't think there would be another left to waste. Understand, we didn't. Engraved in my retinas, like they say, the last thing a murder victim sees, I still carry the flash fading in the blacks of his goggles as Oppenheimer pours my glass. I carry that. It's light as air, but I carry it. Light as light. And then, all right. My first book is Imaginary Sonnets. I'm really excited about it. It's not technically flash fiction, only because it's not prose. But the premise of the book is that each of the poems is a persona poem. And that's sort of what I do in flash fiction anyway. It's a character monologue. So I'm going to read one of the poems from the book, which is basically flash fiction, but with rhymes. This is Werner von Braun to Robert Staver. Werner von Braun, if you know, Operation Paperclip after World War II, recruited Nazi scientists and basically built the US space program. So here he justifies his history by talking about, philosophical consequentialism, that the product of your actions matters more than the intention. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, but what of the reverse? Just like some unexpectedly benevolent inventions, the hug bomb, or the penicillin gun. Ill will can double-cross itself, a power of wild destruction, terrible and terrific, like spoiled wine into water may unsour, begrudgingly prove utile, optimific. The steps to heaven glint with evil's glamour. Is such salvation merely an award for those who, stoking fires of Götterdämmerung before the raging forge, grow bored, until they, fumbling blindly with a hammer, bang a plowshare from a bungled sword? All right, that's probably enough Duer things and enough nuclear history. So this next one was published in Barnhouse, and it's called Greyhound. It's also a character monologue. I like character monologues. This is because I used to take the Greyhound back from college down through upstate New York. And it's a funny feeling you get on Greyhound. You get to look down at other people, even though you're the one riding the bus. Greyhound. From the Greyhound, I can look down on the little Mazdas and Fiats, literally down into their convertible cockpits and count the hairs on the driver's monk-like skulls and read the magazines they've got spread on the passenger sheet. Spread eagle, shameless. This must be what it was like to be up on a big, tall horse back in the horse and buggy days, the kind of real high-up horse that makes people shout, "Get off your high horse!" And that's where that comes from. Maybe they're on the ground. Maybe they're on a lower horse. But get off your high horse, they'd shout straight up at you. "I'm sorry, I can't hear you," you'd shout back. "I'm too high up on this horse." And then for the very last one, I figure if we're going to do this flash fiction thing properly, it should get shorter and shorter and shorter. I used to publish a little bit in Nanoism, the first really short fiction website, which sadly just stopped printing earlier this year. They used to print stories that would fit in one tweet. And of course, tweets have gotten longer, and now they're not tweets anyway, because they're X's. But even shorter than that, there were the 5-word stories, the Augusto Monterosso, the 1-sentence stories. I tried to do about as far as I could take it. This is a story called The Cyclops. Then the Cyclops winked back. Thank you very much.
That was awesome, Daniel. That was very funny and really just great. Thank you, Daniel Galef. And congratulations on your new book. Okay, our final reader is Sarai. He is the author of 3 poetry collections, that's Strapless Bra in Heaven, Geographies of Soul and Taffeta, and The Future's Happy. Her poetry, short stories, and flash in the Southampton Review, Big City Lit, Boston Review, Fairy Tale Review, and the Rye Whiskey Review. Not that any of it's your business, but she was born at home on Long Island near the Sound, and she will be reading with Flash Fiction Forum Thursday, August 23rd, Pacific Standard, 7 p.m. And I think Sarah's going to put that link in the chat. Sarah Sarai.
You know, I'm just going to put the notice on Facebook. There's enough time in the flat. Yeah, okay. All right. So this is 585 words, and it's very nice to be here. And I was asked today, and just very happy about it. So, the living, and I'm reading off my screen because that's what I'm doing. The living and the dead, and so on. My sighting of Mom was on February 7th. I'm going to do that again. My sighting of Mom was on Friday, September 7th. I was in Harlem to see my pals Malcolm and Anthony's new work. They're dreamer dancers who rented performance space for one night and invited friends, including some of the ultra dance elite, for a first shot look. Budo dance, jazz, hip hop, a revenge trial of Robert Moses against a backdrop of rage and gentle lighting. To remind you, Robert Moses is the urban planner responsible for the projects. Anthony's performance was fluid sorrow. They held me in their various arms, and I drained my wine glass before heading out. I hoped my bed was not empty. Fast forward, it wasn't. There were arms waiting to hold me. Fuming about the evil one man can impose, and with the help of other blind and voracious humans, I walked down to 125th and then east toward the subway. Like me, Robert Moses was white, Anthony were black and brown. That's when I saw my mother. She had died that August. She was less put together than the last time I saw her in Los Angeles when she was alive. This version of Mom carried a purse I remembered from 30 years past, a real pocketbook which snapped open and shut like a car trunk when teens unload groceries. When I spotted her on 125th, she was snapping it open to remove a $5 bill The lighting was so direct I could see the amount, which she gave to a young Black woman. She did the same in LA, occasionally give a $5 bill to a young Black woman. The white lady as helper thing is cringy, even if her grandkids were Black. But the helper thing isn't. Mom knew what life dealt out, especially when she lived with my father, especially when she was divorced. She was a trifle out of kilter, but with a heart she used, and often, so it wouldn't break. Hold on, I'm turning the page, I'm afraid to. I said something to her like, Mom, or hi, or want to go for a piece of pie? We used to share slices of boysenberry or rhubarb pie at Dupar's on Wilshire in LA. Food tasted better back then. That's how old I am. But this New York mom was preoccupied, so I let her be, figuring she'd stay around for a while and we'd have a chance to catch up. A few days later, the Twin Towers fell. I wasn't in the towers, was 30 blocks north, in front of a TV in a bar with others who'd wandered by. But I watched my mother help newcomers adjust to the afterlife. How do I know this? I saw it happen. Not with these eyes, but I know what I saw. Don't fight me. She triaged now deceased assistants, executives, guards, clerks, busboys, shoplifters, all shocked by their unforeseen death. 3 months before the attack, Mom died in a rest home. She was 86. Her transition wasn't unexpected. However, for this lot downtown, death was a confusion. So we didn't meet up after all. I wondered if, after a day of helping, she didn't specialize in escorting dead souls who had families in Queens, her home borough. It would make sense, but I'm not a visionary. So that's it. Take all the grief, throw it in a pail which you puncture so there's room for more and then more grief. There's lots, but there's also my friends Anthony and my sweet deceased mother and her $5 bills.
Thank you so much, Sarai, and thank you for jumping in as of today. I really appreciated that. Thank you so much. Well, okay then, we've come to the end, and I'm just going to go back to gallery view so we can see everybody who's here. And congratulations once again to Sandra Arnold, and you can order her book on Amazon. And it's been wonderful having all of you here tonight. I really appreciate your kind attention. Thank you to Mina Chang, who was the my co-host, watching out for danger. And thank you so much, and we'll see you next month. Okay, thank you.
Great reading, everybody, and thank you, Francine.
Thank you, Francine. On behalf
Thank
of
you, and I have
Paul.
cupcakes for Bill Markey.